It's ad break time. The Beyond Solitaire podcast is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. And as usual, they are up to some amazing things. They recently concluded a successful campaign on Backer Kit for Eyeball to Eyeball, a LARP about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Late pledges should be available soon. CLGS is also still offering a certificate in applied game design, and the next class is going to be It's All in the Cards, designing card and card-driven games taught by Damon Stone. He's a brilliant teacher, and his students love him, so you should sign up. The course starts August 26th. Also, just a quick plug for myself. If you want to support the show and help keep it going, please do go to patreon.com/beyondsolitaire, which pays for all of my hosting and subscriptions associated with the podcast and channel. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week on the pod I have a very special guest. This is Marceline Leiman, and she is a solo game design enthusiast like myself, and we're going to talk about solo game modes today. How you doing, Marceline?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm really, really excited to get started because I've been such a fan of this show really since close to the beginning. I recently learned that you started the podcast close to when I actually began my game design journey as an adult. So to me, I just always assumed you've always been there. And so for me, that's been absolutely true. And so it's such an honor to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Also, I sort of feel like, I don't know, the world just changed in 2020. And so really, like, what mattered before that, you know?
Yeah. So I mean, I had a totally different life before 2020.
Yeah. So you mentioned your adult game design life. So what was your game design life like as a child?
Oh, okay. So when I was a kid, I was very creative. My family, I've come from a family of 6, so I have 3 other siblings, and we constantly, played games with each other, played pretend, a lot of theater of the mind kind of things. We like to perform for our parents whenever they'd come home. And I remember in 1st grade, I made my first ever game. It was actually an assignment from my teacher to make a board game based off of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which was our summer reading. And so it was supposed to be a group assignment. I'm pretty sure that I ended up doing it alone. And so I remember, I still think this game was extremely badass. I actually don't have it anymore, but it was basically like a classic roll and move, like inspired by Candyland or Monopoly, things like that. But whenever I get into this with people are like, wow, that actually was a really in-depth version of Candyland. So I was just a really, really excited kid to be like exploring games, because up until that point, I had only played like video games like Pokemon and things like that. So I think going into that space, I was able to like express myself. But at the time, I really didn't think of it as game design actually at all. I didn't realize that what I did as a child, because I went on to make Mario Party clones, my own little like tiny games that I could show to my family, trivia games. And it wasn't really until I started working as an adult in games that I realized that all those things that I had done as a child led me to this moment, that what I thought of as play was actually design. And so I think that's still true about me. I think I still have a very playful approach when it comes to design. I have a really fun and great time whenever I make games. And so I'm just really, really in love with this process.
That's awesome. So back to adulthood. What solo mode might people know you for? And then what do you think they might know you for soon? Let's just get like the overview of your work to date.
Yeah, so in 2019, I was working as a video editor, and I decided I am kind of miserable doing this. So mostly because I didn't want to be stuck looking at a screen for my entire life. I kind of saw the road ahead of me, and I didn't like the way it looked. Of course, now as I'm working on games, I'm using screens a lot when it comes to either testing or balancing sheets of numbers. But the game that I was tinkering with at the time was Oceans, which is a evolution family game from North Star Games. And so at the time, Oceans had been on Kickstarter and was beginning to fulfill. And I was one of the backers of that Kickstarter. Shortly after I received my game, I got an email from Dominic Krapuschetz. He sent out like a general newsletter saying like, hey, we're generally interested in solo mode design. If you have something, we would love to see it. And so this was not an email to me specifically. It was just an email to the community. But I took it to heart, thinking like, that actually sounds like something I could do. Like, I actually really like evolution. I really like Oceans. I can try to do that. And then after months of trial and error, I failed. I failed real hard. I didn't like what I was producing. And so I shelved it. As I continued to work on other little things, tinkering around. And in January 2020, on the precipice of the pandemic, it was my birthday. And I told my partner that I wanted to go back to school for game design. And so I had just missed the cutoff for applying to schools. So I had a year to prepare. And fortunately, that year wound up giving me a lot of time because the pandemic happened. And so I was able to, just prepare. And in the middle of that, my brain was thinking more about Oceans again. And so one day, after like a night of thinking through what the problems were that I was suffering through in the prior iteration of the project, I woke up with like a full solution, like fully solved out. And I tried it. The first thing I didn't even put on pants. I didn't eat breakfast. I just grabbed a cup of coffee, set it up on my table, and tried it out on the table. And it worked. It actually worked really, really well. And I was super excited about it. And so I played 2 games just to validate that this is actually good. And I took a picture of my table and I shared it on Twitter. And what this ended up doing was kind of exploding as to the degree that my own account at the time was able to explode. I was getting like 50 likes, and I'm getting a bunch of comments. And at that point, it was just like an enormous amount of people that were interacting with me on the internet, which is, wild at the time. And so I knew from that moment, like, oh, I'm doing something good. Like, this is the first time that the internet has told me that I should do that. That what I'm doing is something that is enjoyed, that it looks cool, that it sounds cool, either the way I'm framing it or what. And then I got a DM that same day from Dominic, and he said, "Hey, that looks really cool. Could we try it?" And I said, yeah, if you give me a week, I'll write up rules and I'll send it to you. And that is basically it. Everything else just kind of came out of that moment. And Dominic was so sweet. He assigned Ben Goldman, who used to work at the company there, to work with me and kind of mentor me through the development of this game. Ben himself is not like a solo designer, but he's one of the primary designers on Oceans. So he really helped me understand the system, gave me feedback, definitely helped me streamline things a lot. But it wound up just being a nice year where I worked really intimately with Ben and got to get his feedback. And I still think of him as one of my first mentors in the industry.
What is so cool about this to me is that, we think about, oh, you need to go to cons, and oh, you need to make sure you know people, and oh, you need to pitch. But sometimes, if you just make something and put it out there, it ends up in the right hands or on the right tables.
Yeah, I think about that too with what happened with Gloom Haven recently. Like, that was a project that was originally posted to BGG as just like a in-hand kind of game version of Gloom Haven, and then recently got re-released as Buttons and Bugs and became like a full-on product. So I think it's really cool seeing the track where fans can become designers, and how that is such an accessible space, because you really just have to participate in things like, contests, game design contests, or in my case, a Kickstarter where I learned about their interest in accepting design. Because until that point, it didn't really occur to me that a publisher is going to publish my work. I had no idea what the process of pitching was. They came to me, which was, a really, really awesome opportunity.
Man, that's so cool. So were you always a solo gamer? Like, did you want to design solo modes because you were already gaming solo a lot, or did you just kind of see it as a fun design challenge and go down the rabbit hole?
No, actually, I had never played a solo game before designing Oceans. Once I started designing Oceans, I started going down the rabbit hole from there. That tends to be how my interests kind of go. It's like, oh, I'm interested in doing this thing, I'm going to try to make it. And then I just immerse myself afterward, which helps inform if the instincts I had were the right ones or not. And so with Oceans, going into it, I was definitely kind of like discovering a lot of what is now known as like common knowledge. But I was able to discover a lot of it either through trial and error, but also by listening to voices in the industry, such as yourself, Liz, or, Automa Factory, or, like seeing and listening to and reading a lot about people's experience designing games, their philosophies designing games. I was kind of able to express my own voice through this shared collective knowledge that was just accessible on the internet.
How has your relationship with solo gaming developed since you started getting into it? Is it something that you now do? Like, do you play solo games?
I actually have tapered off my personal play of solo games since the pandemic. But during the pandemic, I was very deeply into solo games. PAX Pamir really like enraptured me. I just loved how simple it was, and yet how complex of a game it was. I've written some game design diaries. I wrote one on Ocean Solo, and in it I reference the design for the Wakan in PAX Pamir, being just a simple deck flip of a card, and all the rules for the solo mode cascade out of that simple moment, and the fact that you don't have to make any decisions for the Wakan ever. That to me inspired so much of my own decision making. I didn't realize at the time how important that game was in me playing it, but it's something I think about all the time when I work on solo design, even now.
So I know that you're working on at least one other solo design. So what can you disclose?
Yeah. So just recently, I'm currently working part-time at Underdog Games. They're known for making the trekking series games, so trekking the national parks, trekking the world, trekking through history. And so we recently released in Target Trekking the National Parks, which is technically my first product ever in a big box store. So that's very cool. I designed the solo for the 3rd edition of this game, which you can go play now. And the philosophy for that one was very different from anything else I'd ever worked on, because I knew that this specific product would be played by, families, family plus level gamers, maybe even players who had never played a solo game before, other than maybe Solitaire. And so for that reason, it had to be incredibly simple, incredibly straightforward to run, easy to understand the strategy around like how to thwart the AI. And so I approached it from the same way that I saw in the Wakan, where it's just the flip of a card and it shows you all the decisions that the AI is going to make. Although it being a simpler game, it makes 2 decisions and then it's your turn again. And performing those decisions is much, much simpler. because it's just such a simple game. But it wound up being an approach where I started thinking of this more as an arcade game. So like I grew up a lot playing arcade games, even though like I didn't grow up in the 80s. There were still arcades when I was a kid at pizza places, and I love like those kind of like small bite experiences. And it kind of continued into my love of video games, where like I like roguelikes today. I really like these games that are you play them, and when you walk away, you just take whatever you put in. You don't have to come back to finish a story. I do love games with narratives and with these like longer campaigns, but there's something juicy to me about approaching games in this like one setting kind of vibe. And so with Trekking the National Parks, I kind of approached it sort of like either like Pac-Man or Tetris or like Whack-A-Mole. I tried to think of like what is the kind of like system that gamers that may not have ever played a solo mode are familiar with. And so these specific tentpoles of like game design felt like familiar, but also interesting, because I'd never really see a lot of solo modes that are okay with breaking from the mold of the multiplayer game itself. Because some games, they are designed to be like more solitaire and with only some like minor blocking. And so when you have a game that is fully solitaire, you sort of have to simulate those touches that the other players do participate in, even if they don't always directly impact you. So things like racing to get certain cards, or removing cards from a draft, or being in your way, blocking spaces you wanted to go through or step on, things like that. And so it's often more important to think about like, where are the touchstones that the other players would inhabit if they were here, and try to incorporate that into this game. The problem was that if I were to just try to design a automa that is meant to be a player is making way more complex decisions as far as like what is the best way to find the line. Like, how do they find their line and score those points in order to be competitive? And I found that for this particular system, it just made more sense to me, especially for the weight of a solo mode that I'm specifically trying to create, to abstract it away from the position of being a player and more towards being an antagonist. And so basically these moles pop up out of holes and you need to go thwack them. Otherwise, they're going to cause issues for you. And if you don't thwack them, if you choose to thwack them, they are often distracting you from your like primary goal. And so it kind of gives the same feeling of having your personal goal, but then also having this other thing that is causing you to not just make perfect decisions. So yeah, that was for Trekking the National Parks. And then Trekking the World, which was recently on Kickstarter, it's funny because the two designs, I ended up bouncing back and forth a lot between the two, because of the nature of the production schedules we had. And so you'll see between the two, and Trekking the World is still fulfilling, so it's not out now for the second edition. But between the two, there are like similarities, but also key differences in the decisions that I made for like how they behave like a person. They still have like this whack-a-mole element, but because of the complexity of Trekking the World compared to Trekking the National Parks, and also knowing that the same customer is going to be buying and playing this game, and also the same possible customer, Trekking the World could be their first solo mode ever, I had to approach it, even though it's a more complex game, from the same perspective of this game also needs to be simple and easy to learn, easy to play. And so I approached it from that same whack-a-mole element, but instead, because of all of the other complex elements of the game, more complex decision making, I removed some elements in order to balance out the cognitive load that a player might otherwise feel. And so I think what I learned between these two projects was like, a person is not a perfect machine. They can only, perform and think through whatever is in front of them. And it's really hard to kind of like actually think through like, why is the machine doing this? Especially when you're also trying to keep in your head, like, what am I doing? How am I trying to win? And so both of these projects kind of were my own attempt to balance the cognitive load of like player decision making with the game itself, the system, and how complex each of those are. And again, we're talking about like family plus level complexity games, but because of the customer and who they are, I had to be very careful with like making it too complex.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. One thing I find very interesting when I'm looking at kind of discussions of solo games, and you always think through it yourself if you're a hardcore solo player, is I think a lot of people say that what they want is, I want to play against an automated opponent that really feels like playing against a person, it operates like a person. Like that's sort of like the version that in your mind, right? If you could, that's what you'd have, but that's never actually usually the best like decision space, especially for a lighter game, if you're actually making a solo design. Because to play against a person, you have to like actually run a bot that thinks like a person, and then you have a mess like a flowchart. And I mean, I'll play flowchart bots. I don't like to make flowchart bots.
Yeah.
So
I personally can't stand them. I don't like having to look through, even though there's like an absolute decision being made, I don't like the processing power I have to put in, the energy I have to put in to process it. I know that like I'm actually very critical of like a specific design. I have never really played David Turczi designs because those are just not the games I tend to buy. But I did buy Mythic Mischief, and I was very, very excited for like the solo mode there because I was like, oh, it's like an abstract game that also has like this really awesome theme. So I was really excited to try it. I actually found, and especially because I know that a lot of people revere his style of design of like, I think he tends to he does a couple of different systems, I think he does, but I'm not familiar with them, so I'm not going to describe them. But this one was, you have like 3 possible options that the AI might choose, and a die roll will determine, or a flip of a card or something will determine which of the 3 it chooses. Which I totally get why people are really like that. But to me, it's like too much open information. I like will AP if I just see all that in front of me. I think it's good to know what's going to happen next. But I think knowing that one of 3 things might happen next often stagnates my play and thus causes it to take longer to get back to my turn, rather than solving the problem of predictability, right? I actually don't think that predictability or like having perfect information is a problem. Like for Oceans, for example, that game is pretty much, the way I designed it is pretty much perfect information aside from your own card draws. I designed the AI so that that it was more inspired by games like Slay the Spire and other roguelikes like that, so that you're always aware of what's about to happen to you. But because of the branching factors of like what happens after that moment, it's actually hard to keep in your head of like, oh, if it takes this +2 attack, that means that it can do this. It's just like a domino effect that your brain can't always, calculate. And so it feels like randomness without actually being random. And that's sort of my preference. Like I prefer to get a little heads up of what's going to happen if it's possible within a specific system. It worked out for Oceans, but I like to get a little heads up, but nothing more than that. I want to have absolute information of what's going to happen and then react to it in a way that I think will be best. But yeah.
That's a really interesting way to put that. I I think of it in much simpler terms of things like, well, I want the logic to be simple, but I need the opponent to be strong. I generally tend to favor card-based opponents that are tough, but you have to really work your knowledge of the game, and most of it's your turn. I think solo gamers are inherently selfish, and I don't mean that in a bad way because I'm saying this about myself, but I always want it to be my turn. I always want to be engaged with the game. My turn forever. Actually, one of the things that David and I try to do with Night Witches was there is actually not an AI turn. It's always your turn. You're just doing different steps of your turn. Everything automatically fires at you. It's up to you to evade it. There's literally no upkeep.
That feels like a Space Invaders kind of like setup. Like the AI is just doing its thing and you are just reacting to it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what we'll do next with our current game, but again, like we both kind of have a design philosophy of like I want it to always be my turn. I want it to be my turn as much as possible, and like that is what I will choose.
Totally.
Whereas with something like Oath, it's a very complex game, and so Ricky Royal and I are working on like how to not create too much overhead, but also to make an automated opponent that is convincing enough that it can actually put up a fight. And so that'll be development, right? Like what can we shave off? Just how much has to be there? But I think you're right about
yeah, that is such an enormous project. Yeah, like I do not envy what you're about to do. It is such an enormous project. The fact that Ricky Royal was able to do what he did for Wakan, I think is also a miracle. So I know that you guys can do it. I'm just like, wow, that is an enormous project ahead of you.
We're getting there. Ricky's always slammed though, so he's in demand. I love his solo modes. So this actually leads me to a new set of questions. So you mentioned you were already an active game designer before going to game design school. What made you feel that going into a program was going to be the right move for your career, especially given that so many acting game designers never went to a game design program and just kind of do it?
That's a great question. Before I answer that question, I do want to state that whenever people ask me about going to game design school, like if they should go or telling me that they want to go, I actually discourage it. I discourage it because I had a great experience, first of all. I want to say I loved going to NYU. I love my professors. I love my cohort. The reason why I discourage it is because I feel like a lot of people go for additional education for the wrong reasons. I think that often you'll find that people go because they want to, because they don't know what to do next, or because they are bored at work, and so when you approach a subject like that with that mindset, I don't think that you're actually ready to do what an MFA or a grad program is going to make you do. Because graduate programs are a lot of work, a lot more than I realized before I even started. And so when I say discourage, I don't mean like don't do it. I mean like think about it. Think about whether it's the right move for you. Think about whether this is actually something that you could do on your own or something that you can grow, or if you really need, a boost of community, a boost of conversation with like-minded people, because that's what I felt like I needed. But I also, I approached it not as a means of learning about game design, but as a means of forming community. Because I already knew that going into it, that I'm a smart person. I already knew going into it that I can potentially do this without this at all. That I'm capable of teaching myself, that I'm capable of learning from those around me. And so I tell everyone that what NYU did for me was do in 2 years what I could have done myself in 4. And I think that's true. I think that if you are the kind of person who's able to put in the hours, passionate to put in the hours for themselves, you can do it. it's just going to take time, and not everyone can commit that time. And so if you can't commit the time and you really need like structure to help you, if you want to pivot careers, you have the skills, but you want to develop them further, if you want community, I think those are all valid reasons to go back to graduate school. What graduate school did for me, being in graduate school, I got to meet incredible professors. I should say that in my application, I wrote about Root, so fangirling over here. I wrote about Root. I wrote about my favorite faction being the Otters, and like sort of how they have the sort of above the table conversation that I love in games. They kind of, to me, are like the butter for the game. They make it feel so smooth, and like I just love that faction so much. I love communicating with people, looking each other in the eye, being tricksy. And so I wrote about that as part of my application. So when I was applying to schools, I actually only applied to NYU because I knew that it was the only school I wanted to apply to. Flashback to like 4 years prior, when I was still in my undergrad, the NYU Game Center had just opened for the first time, and I was already a freshman. And so I had just missed the opportunity to be a student at the Game Center by 1 year. So I felt like, oh man, maybe I could transfer, but then I was like, no, I think I'm going to be happy here. I just met all these people. I'm still getting accustomed to my environment. So applying to graduate school, I knew I'm going to apply to NYU, and if I don't get into NYU, I'm going to do it on my own. That's what I'm going to do. And fortunately, I got in. Not everyone should do what I did. Don't apply to one school and hope you get in. It just worked for me. But yeah, definitely took a risk there, but it ended up working out for me.
So what kind of classes do you take in a game design program? Like, what do they teach you?
Yeah, so our most intensive program in our first semester is Game Design 1. There's a Game Design 1 class and a Game Design 2. And Game Design 1 is a 2-semester course. It's basically like a 6-credit course, but they only give us 4 credits. The workload for that class is very intense. It's taught by Eric Zimmerman. So Eric is known for having designed the 4X game Quantum, which is like a board game that came out in 2013. He also wrote one of the first like game design books, like a textbook called Rules of Play. And so we literally learned from his textbook that like those were the readings as part of his class. And just learning from him every day was such a joy. He was a tough teacher. He was probably the toughest teacher I had while there. But he specifically pushed me very hard because I think that we both have the kinds of personalities that both are the same and yet clash. And so the way that I think that there was a mutual respect between us of like the way we think about games, the way we work. And I think that his knowledge, knowing that I'm kind of like, I was kind of arrogant in my first semester of school, acting like I know things, which granted, I did know a lot of things compared to other people at the time, especially at least regarding non-digital games. Everyone else came in with more of a digital game mindset and background. And so it felt like I was going into the program a lot with a strong sense of non-digital design. And Game Design 1 is a non-digital course. And so I think he knew that I know things, but he also challenged me to, challenge my assumptions of like what kinds of games are good, what kinds of games are like actually interesting. I think like I always think about his in my first assignment, we redesigned card games, like classic card games that have like a fundamental flaw. And so I redesigned the game War. And so War, the fundamental flaw is it can potentially be played forever. There's no decisions in the game. And so I designed a game that I thought was really cool. I still think it's really cool. And that basically used war as a mechanism, but not as the game anymore. And so his criticism of that definitely helped me realize that, like, oh, I'm making, just because something works, just because a machine runs, doesn't mean it's doing a task that's important or interesting. And so it's not enough to just make a machine that is impressive, that it works. It's also important that the machine interfaces with the human to make us feel clever, to give us decisions. I like to call this like aspect of design like white space, but Eric would have defined it as play. So like I think that he distinguished games and play as two distinct things that I think are really apt, where games are like a car, right? They are a machine. They can't do anything without the intervention of a human, right? And whenever you engage with the car, you can turn left, you can turn right. But the moment before, if let's say you're maybe not driving a modern car, maybe you're driving an older car, and when you turn left, you kind of have to turn left quite a bit before it actually the car starts to turn left. And it's sort of that space between decision and action that exists play. That's kind of the way that I was taught to think of play. And I think it's incredibly true. I think that the way that I approach that philosophy is I try to create space in my games for the player. I want players to feel like the game that they're playing is not the reason why they came to hang out. It's the people that they are there with. I think all games should think about that. All games should remember that.
Disgusting. No joking.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong podcast. But I think that on one hand, solo games are very much like driving a car. We're just kind of like playing with machines and pieces and seeing how they run. But there's still a playful aspect between us and machine, in the same way that there's playfulness between car and driver. What I described is between like player and player, but I think it's still possible to have play happen between person and machine.
Yeah, I think you have insights into yourself while you play. Although I will say, I think solo gamers are probably the most talkative of all gamers. It's just that we talk after the fact. Like, some people talk about the game while they're playing it, but if you're a solo gamer, you play the game and then you go online and then talk about it to other people online who also want to talk about it.
I think that's because when you're with a group of people, you can kind of digest the experience together, being like, oh my God, that moment was crazy. But when you're alone, you just want to share it with somebody else. But and the thing is, unlike RPGs, unlike like sharing a story in an RPG or sharing a story that happened in a dream, the stories that happen in board games as a solo player are very cogent. They're very like easy to share and distribute, because other people can also experience that and like understand like the relationship between these things and why it's cool. Unlike if you explain like an RPG story, it's just going to sound like gobbledygook to someone else. Like it was so cool to you, but no, it can't be transferred to anyone else.
Speaking of digesting things with others, one of the things you mentioned about the good that your program brought you, it was not only it sounds like you had great instructors, but also you said that you had like a supportive group of people to work with. So what was the role, I guess, of your cohort in your development as a designer?
Yeah. So the program very much is like seeped in group activity. We were constantly working in groups and encouraged to work in different groups with different people. I had probably the largest cohort that the school had so far. I think we were like close to 40 when typical cohorts are closer to 20 or 30. So coming right out of the pandemic, we were the first class that was fully in person since then. And immediately after that, we're just like also the biggest. And so on one hand, it meant that we did not have as much one-on-one time with our professors because there were just so many of us with needs. But it did allow us to constantly try working with new people, which was such a great thing. We can work in, I could have worked with a different person for each project if I had wanted to. But it's sort of natural that as the semesters go on, you sort of find your people. You find the people who match your voice or your taste and enrich the kind of games that you want to make and they want to make. And so I think that it's just because of this is actually, I think, a big part of the community at NYU and why I think it works so well. So Eric gives a speech really early on in our education there, where he says that critique is a way of sharing love and appreciation with another person. You want them to succeed. Like, you were giving critique because we want the other person to succeed. We don't want to tear them down. We don't even want to build them up. We just want them to do well. And so having myself come from more of an academic background, at my undergraduate, I studied cinema studies. And so I have a very critical background. I was often in like critique sessions. I also did like a lot of like film classes. So I already was going into this program with like a strong skill in giving and receiving critique. But it became clear to me in that moment that not everyone had received that same education. And so sharing this specific sentiment to me, I think, is what everyone could equally understand. That we're not here to, tear down each other's egos, but we're here to just make each other's work the best it can be. And it also fostered a sense of community in that, like, if you're working on something, no one's stealing that. It's yours. I think that some spaces are safer than others as far as like sharing your ideas. That's at least the experience that I've had. And I think that with NYU and the people I met at NYU, I feel incredibly safe to express my thoughts and ideas and not fear other people glomming them or thinking of, I could do that better, so I just will without your permission. Because I've definitely seen and heard horror stories happen in this industry of things like that happening. And I think that it would be great if, and I'm not saying that this happens all the time. It doesn't happen that frequently as that we hear of, but it does happen. And then, on the flip side of the coin, it's like, well, ideas are cheap. It's about execution. I think that's absolutely true as well. A good designer can take a bad idea and make a good game. A bad designer cannot take a bad idea and make a good game. So in either case, I think that what I see most often in this space is that same kind of mutual respect of, you're working on something and I want to see it get better. I think our critique circles could, stand to grow and become more nuanced and developed in the way that we talk about games and the way that we express the way that we want games to be improved. But I think that's not necessarily something that we can control as designers so much as our playtesting communities. Because often when we playtest, we're not talking about other designers, but also like people in the public, friends, family. And so whenever I am playtesting, I always try to give a spiel at the start to kind of set the mood of like, this is what we're here to do. This is you're not going to hurt my feelings by like, giving me critique, but this is the kind of critique that is most helpful to me. And if anyone feels uncomfortable, I always give people the option to opt out. And yeah, I think that the way that you run playtests will help facilitate the kind of people that you want to be playing your game and in the way that you're trying to study it.
Oh, that's really interesting. Do you think that your approach to design has fundamentally changed between what you did for Ocean and then your work post program?
Absolutely. I think I am as strong. I genuinely thought that I was a strong designer before this program. I still think I'm a strong designer, and I feel like I'm stronger. And I feel like it's that self-confidence that I feel that makes me every day wake up and feel like I can do this. It's hard. It's really hard, but I can do this. And every day that I receive a rejection email or something, I know that all of it is based on this one single truth, which is that I am good at what I do. And I know that. And no one can tell me otherwise. And so I learned a great lesson in humility going to school, that it's incredible work, but also incredibly fruitful at the end of the journey. I was shown a lot of how my assumptions are incorrect being in school. I was shown so many ways that other people think about games and design games and make games that I wouldn't have designed from my own instincts, which also has just helped me grow and inform me of, and now those are pathways that I can go down. Those are thoughts that I now have. And I think that the more time you spend around creative people like that, and not necessarily in game design circles, just creative people in general, the more that their ideas are going to rub off on you, and you're naturally going to just sync and share and kind of just develop into a more well-rounded person and designer.
Yeah, I love, and I have my own thoughts about this, but I'm just going to make you talk about it. So I love that in the same breath, you express confidence. I know I'm smart. I know I'm a good game designer. And I got humbled. I had to learn a lot. Somebody showed me I was wrong. How do you hold those two things in your mind? And how do you think that that is important to being good at the work?
I think that it's just part of being a complex human. I think that when we accept that parts of us are not perfect, it's just creating a wound to, grow out of, right? If we just like take a moment of failure, and that failure can come in like such a minor form, but also such a large form, and we back away from it, we're accepting it, right? We're accepting that we can't do better than that. But I feel like, and this is true when you first start out as a designer too. I feel like often designers have this discrepancy between what they think is good, what they know is good, and what they can actually produce. And that causes a lot of frustration in early design. But it also means that you have good taste. I think that's important to remember. Even if you can't make good games, you have good taste. You might have good taste. I can't promise you have good taste.
Oh, I know I have good taste.
Yeah, you, Liz, you have good taste. That's what I'm saying. But I think that, I naturally feel a lot of insecurity about whether all of this is true or if it's something that's made up in my mind. But I see so many times reflections that it's not it's not an invention of my mind, that things are happening in my life. People are reflecting the kind of skill that I have back to me, and it's rewarding. It's rewarding every time. But there's this very crucial point at the very beginning of any game designer's game design journey, when you have to realize that that doubtful voice is just the part of you that is afraid. And I think that being afraid is okay, especially when you're doing something new. But it takes courage to do something that's creative, because you're putting yourself out there. And I think that it's a beautiful thing, to share yourself with the world, to be visible. I think being visible is an incredibly important thing for people, especially like us, Liz, where being women, me being a trans person, being visible people in this industry only helps other people see that they can do it too. Like Liz, you being here, me finding you in my early career absolutely gave me the confidence to feel like I could exist. Like, it's just a fact. And so whenever I see other women in this industry, I just feel like so welcome. Even though there are not nearly as many women designers as there should be. And a lot of us are still, in our hearts, in our early career.
Yeah.
Every woman I encounter is making incredibly cool stuff and making inventive things within really fresh themes that I think that the industry should be like chomping at right now. And yeah, I'm just really excited. And so the duality of myself between the confidence and the ego checking, the knowing that I'm not perfect, I'm not yet the best designer I can be. I don't think that I ever want to be at the stage where I can say that,
Yeah,
I always want to be growing and learning. And I
Yeah.
think that that's true for my mind in general. That's why I went back for education, because I inherently knew that I'm dumb and I need to learn. That's why I listen to podcasts. This is why I attend talks. It's like, I know that I have a lot to learn as much as I already know. And that's what keeps me running.
Yeah, actually, I really appreciate that I was able to help you at various points, because actually this conversation has been really helpful for me. So I'll be real, like I have plenty of insecurities. Like I just picked up a job that would give anybody imposter syndrome, right? I'm still waiting for my first published design to come out. Like David and I are waiting on Night Witches to be out. Like nobody's gotten to play my work really yet, except in playtests. And so I bet the farm on this. I gave up a study career. I've moved over 1,000 miles to do this job. And that takes a tremendous amount of like confidence, or at least willingness to roll the dice. But also, I'm well aware that I've got a long way to go just because I'm so early in the process. And so it's fun to talk to somebody else who's like maybe a couple steps ahead on that part of the journey.
It's crazy that you say that I'm a couple years ahead, because I genuinely feel like we're at the same pace. I feel like we're at the same pace. You've been
More of your stuff's on
doing
the
this
shelf.
podcast, but you've been engaging with community.
Yeah.
Right. You can see behind me. That shelf has more games in the back of it, but I still have this dream of one day being like Sen Fung Lim and just having like a whole bookshelf of my stuff.
Give us time.
Just being that
We're gonna
level
get there.
of prolific. Yeah, like I feel like that's true for all the women in this industry that we're currently thinking about, that are currently making games actively. I think that there's still so much to come. I'm really excited for what's going to come in the future. And yeah, I'm just like really excited to support more women and buy their games.
Absolutely, for sure. So on that note, it's time for softy questions. So what games have you been playing recently that are bringing you joy?
I have been playing a lot of Sky Team with my partner. It's been super fun to kind of go through this like limited information, limited communication dice game. And it's honestly, as it's both simple and complex at the same time. Have you been able to play it, Liz?
I have not. It's on the list.
Oh my god, I highly recommend it. I know it's not a solo game, and it's inherently not a solo game, but I think there have been some solo variants designed for it. But as a couples game, as a game to play with another person, it is incredible. Especially if you could run multiple scenarios one after another. I'm honestly so impressed how they mixed all of these little mechanical things that are unique of dice with so it's like a highly mechanical game, but then at the same time extremely thematic. Every element feels like it comes out of a something from the theme, but then is ultimately very crunchy. I'm very surprised that it won the Spiel because it's a 2-player game. I think so many people are saying they wouldn't have bet on it winning, but in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. It's an amazing game. I definitely recommend anyone play it. I've also been playing a lot of Nana, which is I'm forgetting the name of the release in English, but it's a memory game mixed with a with Go Fish, which I know that everyone who has talked about this game says that doesn't sound like a game that should work, but it does work, and it's entirely true what they say. But yeah, I've been playing a lot of like outside of my own designs. Been especially right now playing a lot of lighter games. Actually, I'm finding whenever I have the opportunity to play with non-designers, I tend to find that most people just want to play like a chill, fun, silly game. Oh, I also want to shout out, there's an Oink game I love that I've been playing a lot called Durian. I feel like it's kind of low key on a lot of people's radar, but it's a game that's sort of like Liar's Dice. I think that's the best way to describe it because we are all gorillas running a fruit shop and we don't want to upset the manager. That is the setup of the game. And so it has the Hanabi-like thing where we place our cards in a little holder faced away from us. So we don't know what card we have. All on the cards are like dominoes. And so one half of the domino has like some amount of fruit of one type and another half of the domino has some amount of fruit of another type. And everyone's cards together faced towards the middle of play contributes to the overall amount of fruit that we can sell. And every turn you draw a card and you sell some fruit. You choose which fruit to sell and which not to sell. And then there's some like, twists and gags that are along the journey. But if you ever feel like we've oversold on any single fruit, you can ring a very small bell that comes with it. It's like the most passive aggressive little bell and that fits right in the Oink box. And everyone loves it. I think the bell is what sells the game for a lot of people. And ultimately, if you upset the manager if you get 7 points worth of anger from the manager, then you lose. And every round, the number of anger points goes up. So it's a really great game. Can play up to like 7 people. It's like so fun.
That is delightful. And then if people want to track your work, what is your next project that we should be looking for and where can we learn about it online?
Yeah, so I guess the main thing I would want to plug is my RPG. It's a 2-player role-playing game that is played remotely. This was, in addition to Oceans, my pandemic design games. Like, these were my babies. The game is called Drifting. It's a game where you and another person each have your own diary, and you play totally separate in your own homes. And every day you'll be given a prompt, which sometimes might instruct you to call the other person on the phone and check in on them. It's telling a story about the end of the world within a multiverse. And so each of you have come from your own worlds, your own people, your own situation that the world is ending in. And there is sort of this odd sci-fi like blending of the two worlds. I call it drift. I kind of describe it as the scales of a fish that are like kind of like ready to fall off, and so they're overlapping. I really like weird sci-fi concepts like that, and so and I recently someone told me I should watch the movie Your Name, which it turns out that director makes a lot of stuff that I think I would like too. So definitely recommend that anime. But you can check it out at either my itch. So you can go to my itch page, Marceline Leiman. I'm sure the name will be in the title of this podcast, so you can spell it there. So you could also check out the website for my RPG where you can sign up for the mailing list. It's usually drifting.wordpress.com, but it seems like right now I have to update some kind of certificate. So that will be up soon, and I'm sure Liz will put it in the show notes somewhere. But yeah, that's where you can find me. You could also find me at Marceline Leiman on X, on Blue Sky, and on Discord. And feel free to reach out if you want to co-design or need help with solo design or want to collaborate. I'm happy to do all that kind of thing.
Nice. Marceline, I'm so glad that we had this chat. Thank you so much for giving me some time and coming on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz.
All right, everybody. If you're looking for me online, I'm everywhere as Beyond Solitaire. Please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.